Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another First Friday at Fusion Studio. My name is Rich Dione. I am the co-director of the Fusion Studio for Entertainment and Engineering here at Purdue University.
And my name's Mary Pilot, and I'm the co-director of the Fusion Studio here at Purdue University. We're super excited this week to have the opportunity to invite David Schwind, who's an established acoustician, and to build on last week's session, which was on theater consulting. And so welcome, David. Thanks for being here today.
Morning.
So we'll allow...
Pleasure to be here.
Excellent. We'll allow everyone a chance to read your bio online. And one of the things that we want to talk about, hopefully towards the end of the session, is one aspect of your professional history, and that is your involvement with the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers and some accolades that you received during your career. But we're going to get to that at the very end, so we'll leave that as a cliffhanger. So with that, I'll go ahead and we'll start, and you can prompt me to move through your slides, and we invite people to ask questions in the chat, and we will interject those questions along the way.
Very good. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, and as you know, Purdue is in Indiana, and you may be scattered all over the country. I understand we may have students interested in entertainment engineering and acoustics. We may have other consultants. We may have owners of facilities. We may have other entertainment professionals. So it's a wide variety here to cover, and I'm going to try and do that. So acoustics for entertainment projects. You know, I'll start out with a story, and storytelling is part of the entertainment process. I was once invited on a project at Pixar in 1998 to a meeting where Steve Jobs would be present. He was the major owner of Pixar. You may not have known that. And we were working on a new building project for them. And I got a call from the architect, and he gave me a piece of advice. He said, "So imagine I've invited you to the rodeo and someone says, 'Ride,' as they throw you a saddle." That turned out to be very good advice, because Steve started out with the question that I have posed here. He indicated that he felt that acoustics might just be smoke and mirrors. And so I let him say what he thought, and then I responded with, well, acoustics actually is engineering and science, and after all, when these are practiced at their highest form, they become art. And that seemed to resonate with him. You will encounter this in your career probably, where people are questioning acoustics, probably because it's something you can't see, and not everybody is a good listener. That's what you need to strive to be, though, as a consultant, is you need to be a good listener. So you'll have to navigate that, maybe the way I did or in some other way. You may even encounter it in terms of professional credentials. Are you really more of an engineer, or are you more of an artist? So that's kind of the question that you'll have to resolve. Let's move to the next image, where I want to talk about what is involved in acoustical consulting. So entertainment industry or not, there are many opportunities here. This includes architectural acoustics and noise control engineering, or as I like to call it, noise reduction. Entertainment industry, obviously, is the subject of this talk. Audio, obviously, could be part of that. Audio has many possibilities, though, from loudspeaker design through signal processing, hearing aids, earbuds, you name it. Audio seems to be entering all aspects of our lives. Environmental noise, that's an important one. And of course, environmental noise is largely due to transportation sources, at least the objectionable noise. And that, who wouldn't want quieter airplanes or quieter rockets taking us into space, or quieter space capsules, all part of what you could be doing. Industry has a huge need for acoustical engineers. One you may not think of, I mean, the noise control aspects of products are pretty obvious, but what about sound quality? This is kind of an emerging field, and it speaks to how does your Mercedes-Benz car door sound when you close it. So there's that. Government, people need to have regulations and policy. Even the military has policies regarding noise, and some of their stuff needs to be super quiet for obvious reasons. Another area you might not think of is once you're an expert, you might like interacting with attorneys. You might like the drama of the witness stand, and you could become an expert witness. And there are all sorts of cases that you could get involved with where acoustics is either a large or small part of the case. What did the person hear, or what could the person have heard when this interaction happened? So you'd be answering questions like that, perhaps. And finally, if a sound and air isn't complicated enough for you, being more or less a linear medium, then you could try underwater acoustics, which is nonlinear, since speed of sound varies with frequency. And of course, you underwater may have temperature and salinity profiles to deal with. But there's a lot of interesting things that can be done there, from studying underwater nature, such as whales, to detection of things like submarines. So this gives you a general introduction as to what you might do. Now, let's talk more about entertainment and presentation. I like to group those two into the same category because often entertainment spaces are also used as presentation spaces. So these three things on the right here are generally what we're trying to do. We're trying to do one, two, or all three of these things. Either we want to tell a story using dialogue, or we want to have a music performance. But if we're combining that with visual images, it might be containing the emotional context. Think of a film and think of the symphony orchestra and the ship on the waves and the storm coming. What kind of music would you expect? So you have that. You also have many sound effects. And then finally, you have the envelopment, or the sense of surround, which the surround speakers in your cinema would convey. Or if you're in a symphony hall, perhaps that's the envelopment of the space you're in. Let's go to the next image. So talking about spaces, I like to categorically divide these into two kinds of spaces. Production spaces, where we acquire the acoustic signal or the audio. And, this includes recording studios, scoring stages, sound stages, ADR, which is automatic dialogue recording, and Foley stages, all this kind of thing, sound effects recording. Then we have the other side of the coin, which is the presentation spaces. So we have theaters, multi-purpose theaters for both drama and music and other sorts of presentations. We have concert halls, cinemas, and then things you may not think of. Museums, worship spaces, and theme parks also categorically fit into entertainment acoustics. And I've been fortunate enough to actually work on all these categories in one form or another. So let's go to the next slide. And this will tell you about the kinds of things you might be doing as an acoustical consultant. It usually starts on any project with site noise observations. This is really important because it kind of sets the stage for, first of all, maybe site selection, and it allows you to get the soundscape of the site. What is the maximum sound pressure level? What is the typical frequency spectrum? Is it low frequency dominated? Is there a railway in the distance or nearby? Is there ground vibration? You need to go to the site and figure out all of these questions and quantify them, because as an engineer, you're going to need those numerical values.
So David,
Then you can start, yes.
I'm going to stop you there. You just threw
Okay.
at us a whole lot of technical things here. How does the average person who is trying to think about creating an acoustically sound or an acoustically pleasing site, how do they even know where to begin in terms of inviting someone like you to begin to do all of this? Where does that part of the process start? How does that begin?
Well, it depends what the project is, I suppose, but I would like to encourage developers and building owners to get the key consultants on board as early as possible. Quite often, acoustics and especially audio and audiovisual are brought in far too late in projects, and opportunities are lost and costs increase. Knowing exactly when to bring us in is a bit of an art, I would say, and sometimes this is broken into phases. Sometimes you have environmental studies preceding any project, and often that might even be done by a separate firm. But if you're the designer of a building, or part of the design team for a building, I should say, then you need to gather your own information, preferably. So, yeah, there is some field work. It was my point in saying this, involving instrumentation, and even if you just go to the site and make observations, that can be helpful, so that you can see what goes on at the site, because it varies. Acoustics is not a static environment. The noisescape is varying all the time. And then what my point was going to be was, go ahead.
And it sounds like, from just looking at this list of items, you know, oftentimes from a novice's perspective, I might think about what's coming out of the front of the stage, but I may not be thinking about everything that's going on behind the stage, around the stage, or even outdoors.
Oh, right. Well, this is where you have to put your thinking cap on and start imagining the project and what the project wants to accomplish. And that's going to lead me right into some things I'm going to be talking about here in a minute, having to do with writing a good program. But I'm jumping a little bit ahead. Let me stick with quantifying the site, which then leads you to determining the amount of sound isolation you need based on how quiet you want it to be in the building. And so that's important, because that directly affects the cost of the project, and the building owner is very concerned about that. Then you have the interior acoustics, of course, which is what we all tend to think about, and that's largely thought of as the reverberant nature of the space. Is it suitable for the application? If it's terribly reverberant, it might not be very suitable for a lecture, for instance. On the other hand, it might be great for organ concerts. So you have the whole spectrum there. And then you have a whole bunch of sort of engineering things that people maybe generally don't think about, that need to be addressed and need to be carefully thought through on the project. And that's the heating, ventilating, and air conditioning, noise and vibration reduction. You have plumbing systems, which can make noise, and you need to locate the ducts and pipes in a way that won't be disruptive. You have electrical generators nowadays. Often these are diesels, although maybe we're going to see more batteries and inverters in the future. And elevators, escalators, those all may need attention depending on their location. And finally, every project has electrical transformers, and we have more and more inverters, and all of this stuff needs to be addressed. And even if you're not in an entertainment project, if you're in a mixed use project, which could incorporate residential, retail, parking garage, offices, all in one building, you need to think about all of these things and how they will impact the most sensitive use, which is the residences. So let's look at the next slide. and we'll go and see, yeah, there we go. The first project I'm going to talk about, which is the Walt Disney Concert Hall. This started for me in 1998 and involved 3 days of site noise measurements that were done by my colleague. And very interesting project. Frank Geary was the main architect for the project, and Nagata Acoustics from Tokyo were the prime acoustician for the room acoustics of the concert hall. That was their specialty. And Salter's office, who I was a partner with, we were involved in all the noise reduction aspects, including the sound isolation from outside and so forth. So what did the site noise study tell us? Well, it told us that the city's buses had a horrendous tone at 80 hertz, which was pretty hard to attenuate because it's such a low frequency. And it told us that there are frequent helicopter overflights, as in almost continuous, because of the police and city buildings that are directly adjacent to site. So Frank Geary's vision included having skylights and a large window in the back wall of the hall. And these needed to address all these sources of sound, those being the weakest links. So yeah, the site noise study, can be very valuable. Also, these kinds of venues can be used for recording, and you want them to be quiet enough to facilitate that. So yeah, it can be a challenge. What I learned from this project was that maybe, although when I left Purdue, I thought it would be fantastic to be involved in concert hall design, when I discovered the reality of the length of the project, the fact that these projects can stall for a period of years depending on how the funding goes, and just how politically intensive they are, just, the fundraising and all of that, maybe that wasn't exactly where I wanted to wind up in the entertainment space. So back to what you need to do as, let's say, a developer or building owner, is you need to get a good facility program together. What do you want to do with this building? What do you want to do in it? And how do you want it to function? You need to write that down, and preferably need to write it down on a room-by-room basis. Then you need to go through the process of selecting a team of designers. You need your architect. You're going to need a mechanical, structural, electrical consultants. You probably, if it's an entertainment project, you're certainly going to need an acoustics and audiovisual consultant. You're going to need a theater consultant. You're going to need a whole host of people. You need a lighting consultant for the architectural interior lighting, probably. You're going to need a landscape architect, and so on. I know last month, Kimberly Corbett-Oates addressed some of this, and I can say that I completely agree. Those are you may wind up on teams with 15 or even 20 consultants on the larger projects. It's quite a challenge for the architects today to manage all this design input. So once you have your program and your designers, you can develop the technical criteria. And again, this needs to be numerical. So now you can see where we're going with this. We have the numerical quantities for quantifying the noise environment. Now we want to quantify what we want to achieve inside the building. So those need to be established. And then after that, you begin to see the architect and possibly yourself and the theater consultant preparing diagrams, usually showing adjacencies and, things that demonstrate the flow of people and or goods through the facility. So they're usually proximity diagrams. But acoustically, we actually think of it as anti-proximity diagrams. Would we really want to put a super sensitive recording stage next to a really loud screening room? Not really, because we probably can't even achieve the sound isolation necessary at any kind of a reasonable cost. So that's why it's so important to bring us in early, so that spaces don't get co-located that are going to cost the owner a huge amount of money later, and may not even meet the program requirements. So from these diagrams come schematic plans, sometimes alternatives to choose from for the owner. The owner provides comments, and then you can really start getting into the final working drawings for the project. You usually have a contractor on board at that point to start the cost estimation process and inform the design. And then depending on the type of contract it's going to be, you may have hard bids coming in, or maybe a cost plus contract. And then once you get into construction, you're going to need to visit the site and review that things are going in the way you intended. For instance, I want to step back here for a moment and say that when the plans are developed, you're also developing written specifications. And normally, unless it's stated otherwise, written specifications dominate the contract requirements for the contractor. And so you're representing the owner, and the contractor usually is a separate entity unless it's design build, in which case you're probably working for the contractor. But it's important, the specs, I became kind of a spec writer because I found I could control the quality of the job from the specifications in writing. And that's an important thing to be able to do. And I was able, in a lot of cases, to get the kinds of products and procedures implemented there that we needed to have done. And so that's what the contractor owes the owner, and that's what you're going to the site to make sure is happening. Eventually, the project is more or less completed, and you'll go there to make measurements probably to see if all the goals were achieved. Maybe even need to make some adjustments if you have variable acoustics, which is something we'll get into in a few minutes. So there's a variety of project types, and I'm going to try and touch on each one of these. The first one being new construction, of course, was like the Disney Concert Hall. But I have a project coming up, the Fox Theater, which addresses the next four. It was a historic preservation project when it started. It was, of course, a restoration because it was changing uses, kind of. It was adaptive reuse, and it was also a rehabilitation project. So you can have all of these mixed into one project or just one of them. Let's see the next image. There we go. So this is our next project, and I was fortunate, very fortunate to be selected to work with Fred Degdagen and Gensler on, they're the architecture firms, on the Television Academy Theater. And strangely enough, this theater was only 25 years old before it was demolished and replaced with this new one. And it was because the entrance was at the wrong end of the building. And the Television Academy wanted to be able to have this drive up to the lobby and walk into the theater in a very elegant fashion. And the theater was exactly 180 degrees to the direction it is shown here. And so they elected to actually replace the entire building to sort that out, among other things. In any case, the challenge for me on this project and for my friend Fred Degdagen was to deliver on the owner's request to have wood walls. Now, wood walls are not typically what one would want in a screening room. So we struggled with this a little bit. Wood can also be shiny, and we didn't want glare off of the wood from the image on the screen, because that would be a distraction. So we had this acoustics and visual thing going on, and we finally decided that this wood slat arrangement with varying size slats and varying gaps in a very particular pattern would meet all the requirements. And so we came up with this, what I consider to be a fairly elegant design with the lighting incorporated, and turned out to be quite a nice project. Let's look at the next one. So now we're going back in time. This is back to 1992. And this project we got involved with because we were involved in the Disney Concert Hall project. That's often how it works. You meet people, you make friends, and they bring you along to the next project. This is for the Music Associates of Aspen. Think of it as the Aspen Music Festival. And of course, they've had a tent there in Aspen for many years. And this project was to give them an indoor space to perform when it's raining, and also to rehearse. So this is a really unique project in that while for a concert hall, 600 seats is pretty small, it also functions very much as a rehearsal space, but not for one orchestra, but for two. They actually perform with a double orchestra. So there's a unique feature in this hall where the front 4 rows of seats fold flat and the stage pulls out to expand the stage greatly. Some of the other unique features in this facility are that it is a reverse fan. When you look at the plan form on the drawings, you'll see it's a reverse fan. And that was done purely for acoustical purposes to widen out the image sources and give you an enormous immersive experience. And if we look at the next image, you'll see that the walls, you see the black portion on the left slide, and then if you look at the right slide, you see it's wood. The black is sound absorbing material, and those are slide out panels that are controlled manually and individually, and you can adjust the reverberation time and the early sound reflections from the walls using those. This facility is also used by the American Film Institute, and I should have pointed out that when we were looking, if we can go back one, when you look at the front of the room on the right, those panels behind the piano fold up and reveal a CinemaScope motion picture screen. So in order to get the room to be dry enough, in other words, not too reverberant, we needed to put in those sliding panels that I pointed out on this following slide. Now, if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about another project briefly, the Grammy Museum Theater. So what we're doing is we're looking at a portfolio of projects that are varying, but all in the entertainment field. Now, this is a museum, and I worked on quite a few museums in my career and really wound up enjoying working on museums because they have interesting program requirements. You need to have art history lectures, typically. You need presentations of panel discussions. Often you have music performances, and that was the scope of this particular theater. So if we go to the next slide, there we go, you can see a small theater. Now this is kind of force fit into a much larger building, and it was kind of a leftover area for the developer, and it was a challenge, let's say. Bruce Lightbody of Gallagher Architects and I would have loved to have had a much higher ceiling, but eventually we got comfortable with this, thinking of it more as like a Ronnie Scott's jazz club than a concert hall. And after all, it is the Grammy Museum, so all kinds of musical performances could occur in here. And so we decided that we needed to push the ceiling up as high as we possibly could. That was a challenge. And eventually, well, the shape of the building is kind of interesting. It comes to a point behind the stage. So the behind the stage area gets smaller and smaller as you go deeper into the space. So it's kind of a triangular thing. And the structural steel is not orthogonal. It's kind of making this diamond-shaped pattern, kind of like what you see on the ceiling there. So if you look up at the ceiling, you see the parts that have the lighting in it. Those are actually sound-absorbing fabric panels with real thick sound absorption to absorb low-frequency sound, to prevent excessive low-frequency reverberation. And we pushed that up between the steel, and we discovered the steel was making this really interesting diamond-shaped pattern. So actually the ceiling, once we got there, sort of designed itself, much to our amazement, and it was actually quite a pleasing pattern. So every once in a while, you get lucky. So let's proceed to the next slide. And this is the Fox Theater I mentioned earlier as being a historic. I believe it was constructed in around 1927. I think it was originally a vaudeville house, and then shortly after, it likely was converted to cinema film projection. And like so many of these large film houses, when multiplexes came about, you no longer, and you had a much bigger supply of movies, you no longer needed 12 to 1,500 seats. You needed houses that had less than 200 seats and less, basically. And so these just fell into disuse and often severe disrepair. And quite often even were occupied by the homeless and all kinds of nefarious activities going on in them. So bringing these back, because they are beautiful buildings, is something that is many people enjoy the historic heritage of theaters. It's a whole field unto itself, really. And this one is no exception. There are tax credits for restoring historic theaters, and that was one of the ideas here. No, this is not in St. Louis. I can see that question. I'm going to say it's here in the San Francisco Bay Area. In any case,
David, one thing that I wanted to bring up in here is that, you know, you mentioned that there may be financial pressure or, you know, issues around these sort of historic renovations. So how does one balance out the need for, say, an expert acoustical consultant with the notion that, you know, these sorts of venues are probably facing a great deal of fundraising pressure to even just be able to do the basics? How does that all resolve itself?
With difficulty in this case. So I'll just make this brief because there's something here near the end that I definitely want to show you guys and gals and all the folks watching. The challenge in this theater was that we weren't brought in earlier, and social media made the comment, hey, great venue, we love the space, we love the acts you're bringing in, but what about the acoustics? And when I went out there the first time, I could hear the problem from the lobby. It was excessively reverberant, especially in the low frequency range. And they really, for cost reasons, did not want to bring in an acoustical consultant completely. They were trying to use the audio and loudspeaker design firm to do the acoustical consulting. And they really, while they might be able to do that in some cases, they really weren't equipped with the experience to do this. And they came up with a plan that did not meet with historic requirements. So anyway, to make a long story short, we came up with this idea of using historically appropriate drapery with very thick sound absorbing material behind it to absorb the excessive low frequency sound that was muddying the entire performance. So whether you want us or not, sometimes you're going to wind up hiring us after the fact to straighten out a problem. And that's a great learning experience for an acoustical consultant if you've never encountered this. I encountered this before, and so I knew what we were going after once I had heard it. And so experience does count, but there are a lot of learning experiences along the way. So let's jump to the San Diego Symphony Orchestra. We'll skip over this. This was just something that I was going to talk about using computer modeling. And this is a project we did in Aspen with Harry Teague's office, a great architect, great family of industrial designers. And these were replacement buildings. And this is an orchestra rehearsal stage that we did there. And it has somewhat variable acoustics. We had sound absorption, as you saw in the previous slide, the white material that can come down over the windows and reduce the acoustic glare, let's call it, off the windows. We can look at the next image. the Hollywood Bowl. So this is starting to get to where I want to go. History is a big thing at the Bowl. It's been there for a long time. And the history of audio at the Bowl is that in 1936, Bell Labs installed a 3-channel sound system there. And in 1987, 88, we also installed a 3-channel sound system. Basically, the right and left channels are like double THX systems, and the center channel is like a quadruple THX system. That's no surprise, though, really, because that's what we were familiar with. And also, we had Tom Holman as a consultant on this, who was the developer of the THX system. So let's look at the next slide. The Hollywood Bowl seats 18,000. This San Diego Symphony Orchestra Bayside Performance Park, and this is the architect's model, has about a 4,000 square foot stage, and if I recall correctly, can seat up to 6,000 people on the lawn. And there you can see, looking from the stage out onto the lawn, what a beautiful setting. You can see on the left side there the omnidirectional loudspeaker being used to test the space. It's completing construction right about now. It's almost completely finished. So they'll start doing their testing and adjusting. In this particular image, you can see microphones hanging. If you look, you'll see 3 on the left and then 3 in the center and maybe a couple over on the right. And what that's all about is electroacoustic reverberation enhancement. So we can adjust the space to just about anything, but we can make it more suitable for the symphony orchestra. Obviously, we might not use this for a rock and roll show. The idea behind this is for the San Diego Symphony to become more financially independent and for the orchestra to have another source of revenue. So essentially here, the orchestra is the promoter. And if we go to the next image, you can see how we handled some of the design of the walls. Now, this is all going to be covered in fabric, the walls and the ceiling. But you see, we have kind of a patchwork of absorptive and reflective panels above maybe 15 feet. On the sidewall, you can see we have, I don't know, let's see here. Actually, if I catch up with you, I can look here. There's quite a few loudspeakers in this space to do this acoustic simulation. There are 8 in the rear. You can see them there about mid-height on the glass window. They're these long horizontal things. There's 7 of those on each side, so you can also see those now that you know what you're looking for at about the same elevation. And there are 15 overhead and grouped in 5 rows. And then we have 4 subwoofers, as you can see on the back wall, and 4 on each side wall. So there's quite a lot of gear involved in doing these electroacoustic enhancement projects. So at the lower side walls, we actually just have diffuse panels. And so if we look at the next slide, there's sort of a details image of that. Oh, on the right, we have, looking straight up, you can see a microphone hanging down, the big black ball on the lower right. And then we have the panels I was talking about, reflective and absorptive on the left. And then on the left image, you can see the sound diffusing panels. So Sean Murphy, the scoring engineer who's credited on so many of John Williams' scores and many others as well, in fact, he's an Academy Award winner. He brought me into this project, and in communicating with him about the acoustics and what would be desirable, I put it in the context of the music scoring stage for film and orchestra, because that's something that he is very familiar with and expert in, and it allowed us to have a way to converse about the acoustics in a manner that would be easier, let's say. So that's a skill you'll have to develop, is how to communicate with your client in the terms that they know very well. So here we are.
Can I ask a quick question here? There's one thing that you brought up that I think is an interesting point. You know, you mentioned that by kind of thinking through the uses, the acoustical needs, I guess, the criteria, if you will, for the space, you actually created a venue that had the potential for enhanced revenue, right? They could suddenly be able to book different types of events and acts, and they could actually be a revenue generating entity rather than drawing upon the local government funds. So I mean, I just think that's a really interesting point in terms of the notion of a consultant being able to create value that maybe venues hadn't thought about in the past just by eliciting your expertise.
Right. As I used to say, I'm always happiest when my client's making lots of money with the projects that we have built. I should add here that it really, I don't know exactly whose idea it was. It wasn't mine, but I certainly endorsed it right away, this idea of bringing this electroacoustic enhancement into this facility, because it's really too large for really fine orchestral stuff. And typically shells like this aren't that great anyway, orchestrally speaking, not like a symphony hall anyway. And this allows the symphony hall environment to be brought into the space. So I think that was kind of a stroke of genius. I think Sean Murphy did that because I know he experimented with it on a scoring stage and really enjoyed being able to have that extra measure of control. And the symphony also enjoyed playing in space more. So yeah, bringing value to projects is that's the name of the game. That's where it's at.
Okay.
So this is what you wanted me to talk about a little bit. Go ahead.
Yes. So, one of the things I want to highlight here, if folks on the other end of the audience have had a chance, they'll notice that you were really involved with a lot of your professional associations throughout your career. And in particular, SMPTE awarded you with the Samuel L. Warner Medal for contributions in acoustical design towards creating these amazing soundtracks and venues. Could you talk a little bit about, first of all, what did it mean to receive an award like that? Because it feels like a lifetime achievement sort of award. And then second of all, could you talk a little bit about the value of connecting with these various professional associations and how that community building played into your success?
Well, right. Eventually, if you're fortunate, as I was, you'll gravitate towards some sort of a community while I continue to do all kinds of projects. The film community here in California was probably my center focus, and well, certainly was my center focus. And to get this kind of award was so surprising and so made me so happy. I can't even begin to express it. Yeah, it is kind of like a lifetime achievement award, at least in my case. When you look back at the previous recipients and even the current recipients, it's an amazing list. You see names like Harry Olson and Ray Dolby and Johan Allen and Tomlinson Holman, and I could just go on and on. These guys have all been super important to film audio. And I'm an outlier, really. As I told them, I was so surprised when they gave me this award. In fact, when I got the letter telling me, I threw it on a heap of mail because I thought, oh dear, I've forgotten to pay my bill. So 2 days later, when I got around to opening it, I saw what it said inside. And my initial reaction, truthfully, was I thought, this is somebody playing a joke on me. And I had already thrown the envelope away, so I went and retrieved the envelope out of the dustbin to verify that it was for real. And it turned out that there was somebody I was supposed to call, and it was real. And I was super surprised, to say the least, and made me very happy, as you can tell. I did participate in a lot of film dubbing stage projects and scoring stage projects, both up here in Northern California and down in Los Angeles. I had the opportunity to work extensively with Paramount, especially Warner Brothers, near the end of my days as an acoustical consultant with Universal, and of course, especially with Lucasfilm and Dolby up here, and as I mentioned earlier, Pixar. It was an incredible run, and I feel very fortunate to have been able to be in the right place at the right time, is really all I can say about that. And so to close, I've got a couple of further things, and then we can open up for questions. So what do you need to be able to do as a designer to be successful? That's the big question. And I think it's enthusiasm for your passions that you need to communicate, and you need to become a good communicator. I was not a communicator when I left school, but once I'd been a consultant for a couple of years, I realized I need to be able to figure out how to do this. And so I started volunteering for some speaking assignments. At first it didn't go so well, but then it went better once I got involved in a course where it involved videotaping and reviewing the videotape. So there's a clue. Collaboration is the name of the game. It's not you, it's the team. So find good teams and try and keep going with them on various projects. It'll be multiple teams for multiple kinds of things. Always stay creative. You'll find places where you feel like you're boxed in the corner, but I never actually did get boxed in the corner completely. There's always a creative back door you can open. It's important on the other side of life to be able to deliver on your schedule and your budget. That's absolutely necessary. Every owner demands that, so you need to do that. And then as you progress upward in the management of your consulting firm, if that's what you're doing, you need to be able to sell your ideas, and you need to be able to sell your services and your projects. And then finally, you're going to be negotiating fees and negotiating schedules, so you need to try and learn how to do that better. And that all comes from setting realistic goals and schedules. I can't emphasize this enough. Having unrealistic goals and schedules is really the nemesis of every project. So let's look at the next slide. So finally, what do I want you to take away from this? Well, it's really the first line here and the last line. As I've been trying to stress throughout this presentation, entertainment projects need the acoustics and AV from the outset. That will save you money if you're a developer or building owner or someone hiring design professionals in the entertainment field. I didn't really cover this too much, but variable acoustics and the electroacoustic example at the end is one form of variable acoustics. I guess the Aspen project is another, where we were sliding sound absorbing material in and out of the walls. That can help your building become more adaptable to a variety of needs. And nowadays, we can't build separate buildings for concert facilities and theater and opera and right on down the list, ballet. We need to be able to do more with one building, and this allows for that. There are some issues that come with it in terms of labor and cost, but it isn't as expensive as building a completely separate building. I did not really cover this, but it is entirely possible today to use computer modeling to produce an audible model that you can listen to, most importantly, and maybe secondarily you can use for your client to listen to. But there are some, this is an emergent field, and there are some tricks to this which aren't that obvious. And still, you need to apply good judgment and reasonableness to what you're hearing out of your model. So I want to just say that what's the sales pitch on acoustics? They always enhance the message. If your dialogue is unintelligible because of the reverberation or the background noise is too loud, then that's an issue. And finally, most important for those of you aspiring to be designers and consultants, you need to be a good listener. try and listen more than you talk. With that, we'll open it up for questions, I think.
Sure.
Fantastic, David. Thank you so much for all that you shared. There's so much information, and the projects that you've had a chance to work on are fascinating. We've got 3 questions that are in the chat and the question and answer panel to try to catch here in the last few minutes. And Robin and Lee, I'm going to try to combine your questions if I could, because they're similar. But Robin asked specifically about the Grammy Museum. You talked about finding synergy between the ceiling graphics and the acoustic design. And Lee has asked about how do the architectural details in theaters like the Fox impact the acoustical design. And it sounds like it's both questions are really kind of about how do you merge the needs of the acoustic design with the other features, graphic or architectural. How does that process work for you?
Well, I don't think you can bring a set attitude to a project. You have to look at what in the case, you have to design the design issues carefully and make sure you understand what really is an issue and what isn't. And, in the case of the Grammy, we got a bit lucky there because the steel laid itself out in a convenient pattern for us to pop up in between the steel with our extra space to incorporate our deep sound absorption. In the Fox, they had already treated, so there had been someone through before us, I think I mentioned this, who was smart enough to put sound absorbing material in every nook and cranny that wasn't visible so that it wouldn't influence the historic aspect. But it wasn't enough. And it became clear that we needed to influence the look, but it had to be done in a historic, acceptable manner. And this is what I knew. And actually, I worked with Kurt Schindler of ELS Architects in Berkeley. He has done a great number of historic buildings, and we've worked together on many projects. And we knew that together we could come up with a solution that would do this. So it's partly who you're working with, it's partly what you may know, and it's partly the definition and making sure you've got the definition of the issue correct. In that case, it was a subtle definition. It was low frequency excess reverberation. And that wasn't obvious to everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Oh, now we got more questions coming in. Before I get to this question in the question and answer panel, I hope this will be a quick one. Skylar asked about the San Diego project that you were talking about. Was that done in collaboration with Meyer Sound?
Yes, it was.
Yes, it was.
They were the group who are providing the electroacoustic enhancement.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. And then Lee has asked another question. Can you talk about interactions with a general contractor on a construction site while working with delicate acoustical materials? Where in the construction process are the acoustic elements assembled?
Oh, well, that varies on the kind of project. I know in San Diego, they wanted to assemble as much offsite using less expensive offsite labor rather than more expensive potentially. And I'm not sure in that case whether the labor was, exactly whether it was union labor or not, because that tends to be more expensive. But we see more, pre-development of material offsite on a project like that. But in the screening rooms, usually the acoustic material goes up on the walls and then the fabric gets stretched over it. And this is a very porous, sound transmissive fabric. You ideally can't see through it, but the sound readily sees through it. And that was a way for us to allow the architect to have more freedom with the shape and interior look, and of course the colors using the fabric, while we could control the acoustics behind the look, if you will. So it varies from project to project. You just have to do what's suitable and what seems to be working.
Fantastic. That's a great answer. Mary, I turn to you, because I think we're running out of time. Do we want to wrap this up?
Yeah, I guess I just want to thank David for sharing his wealth of experience. I mean, one of the things we didn't even get to really was talking about how you can be an engineer and also be that creative person. You talked about a lot of your creative solutions, but I think we could spend another whole hour just talking about how those solutions evolve and how you immerse yourself into the creative space with others who are creative, or how do you translate, these technical metrics and criteria into, we want it to sound louder, or we want the sound to be more exciting, or, how do you convert those sorts of qualitative measures into quantitative measures. So we hope that you'll come back in the future and maybe share more of that part of your history with us. But again, we thank you for spending an hour with us today.
Hey, it's really been my pleasure, and I want to encourage everybody that's interested in this field to pursue your dream. You may wind up, as I mentioned, I made some turns and you constantly are faced with choices. Do I go down road A or road B? And I made a lot of those, and they weren't necessarily the choices I thought I would make when I was in school, but it worked out just great in the end. So follow your instincts.
Excellent.
That's great advice, David. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Mary, I didn't cut you off there, did I?
Nope, I think that's a wrap.
All right. Well, I do want to just make a quick announcement before I let everybody go here that we do know who our next First Friday presenter will be. I'm pleased and proud to say that we'll have Brian McInnes Smallwood, who is faculty at James Madison University, who's been a technical director for many, many years. He recently released a book, Productivity Through Wellness for Live Entertainment and Theater Technicians. And safety and wellness is an important topic for all of us. And so we're pleased to have him. That'll be March 5th at noon Eastern time, and you'll see more announcements about that in the future. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks, David. Thanks, Mary. And we'll see you all soon.
Hope to see you soon.